Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.
Welcome to all.
History is made of stories.
In this episode, we'll be talking about prejudices, stereotypes, and other sorts of cognitive bias.
We regularly come across two opposing views when it comes to cognitive bias. On the one hand, there are those say, yeah, I'm aware of it. I know it exists, but it definitely doesn't affect me. On the other, you have people who are determined to prevent cognitive bias and stamp it out at any cost, even to the point of denying its existence, which only compounds the problem.
That sort of bias is insidious. It's everywhere, but it sometimes gets overlooked. You might be aware of it as a problem but still end up blundering on blindly. You know it's wrong in theory, but you do it anyway. Smoking kills. Yeah, I know. Pass me a cigarette. So, what can we do? How should we tackle cognitive bias? What's the story?
A cognitive bias is a distortion. Wikipedia calls it a misstep in thinking. A bias is the belief in something that may not be true, without necessarily being proven to be so, particularly when it involves something done subconsciously or instinctively.
For example, stereotypes are biases because they involve preconceived opinions and beliefs, simplistic characterizations based on routine judgments. Stereotypes distort our thinking.
There are lots of different types of bias: favoritism, framing, anchoring, confirmation bias, apophenia, the halo effect, and the illusion of control are just a few of them.
Buster Benson's Cognitive Bias Codex, or cheat sheet, highlights an impressive number of biases. It also breaks them into helpful categories, showing how they affect us and why our brain reacts the way it does.
For example, everything linked to the storage of data in our brain, memories, striking situations, etc., is naturally built on bias. We can't store our memories down to the finest detail, so we simplify without even realizing.
And because in some circumstances we need to act and react fast, biases are also there to help us make quick decisions. Those decisions are of course biased, but at the time we're more focused on the decision itself.
That applies to all of those instinctive decisions we make. You hear a noise. You assume it's a horn because you've already heard the sound of a horn in the past. And by simple association, horn means car and car means danger. So, you jump out of the way.
So, biases can be helpful. They can save lives. That's because they empower us to take action without thinking, to save our skin. It's a matter of survival.
When you look at it like that, biases are vital. Which is why we shouldn't try to get rid of them completely. If we did, we'd lose the reflexes that let us get through life without overthinking things.
But that same lack of questioning means everything becomes automatic, preconceived, and spoon-fed, which increases the risk of error. If you jump out of the way without thinking, then you realize the sound wasn't actually a car. It doesn't really matter. But biases are everywhere and they creep into every decision we make, even when we think we are thinking and really weighing up a situation.
That's where the trouble starts. When prejudices and stereotypes lead to thoughtless action. And when the outcomes we've just mentioned are never filtered through open debate, culture, and acceptance of others.
So, the issue definitely isn't clear-cut. The problem is not the bias itself. We're all biased in one way or another, and those biases can sometimes be helpful. The problem is the lack of awareness, the lack of reflection, and the risk of lapsing into inane, knee-jerk reactions.
Okay. We can't get rid of our biases, but we can keep them in check. We can do that by being more aware of them, by questioning ourselves and resisting the temptation of spoon-fed information. Basically, by using critical thinking. There are two main ways to keep bias in check. Surround yourself with other people and make sure you have a real decision-making process.
To recap, there are lots of different types of bias. Although they stem from our survival instincts and sometimes help us make good decisions quickly, they shouldn't prevent us from making informed decisions. We shouldn't try to get rid of them completely. That's impossible, but we should try to keep them in check. We can do that with the help of a few simple steps, but that's a story for another day. Is that right?
Exactly right. Way to make a long story short. Story RH, the podcast that makes a long story short.